Hello, I'm Elise. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. I am here to finally do my August wrap up. It's late, but I'm gonna do it. And in the month of August, I actually had a really good reading month, kind of quantity and quality wise. I read 12 books in the month of August, which is a little bit more than normal. And I also had 3 5-star reads in August, so that is great. And I enjoyed a lot of the other books as well. So I'm only gonna be talking about 11 books in this video, which is good because it will be slightly less long. And the first book that I read in the month, I finished on the 1st of August, and I actually included it in my last wrap up, and it's in a try a chapter video from last month that I do a whole review on. So if you're interested in that book, I'll link those videos down below and you can go check them out there. That book is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that book, down below, click those links and you can check out my full thoughts there. So the next book that I read in August was one of my 5-star reads, and it is Woman Eating by Khoda. And this book has been making the rounds. It's very popular right now, very buzzy, and I adored this book. So the premise of this is a new adult, like young 20s woman who is half vampire, half Japanese, and they have recently just put their mother in kind of like a retirement community because she has dementia or a dementia-like illness. I can't remember if they specify it or not. And so she is living out on her own for the first time. And her mother is the vampire half, and her mother was always in charge of procuring blood for them, and now she has to figure out how to get blood for herself. And they don't drink human blood, they drink pig's blood. So she's trying to figure out how to get pig's blood, and it's proving much more difficult than she could have imagined. So it is a vampire story technically, but like everyone else has been saying, it's really more like a slice of life story of like struggling in new adulthood and new independence, and how do we start reckoning with all of our own like thoughts, feelings, beliefs outside of our parents' thoughts, feelings, beliefs. And I loved it for that. I think it was a great portrayal of that. And it's a very slow paced book for the majority. The end really does like pick up in the last like 20 pages or so. But yeah, it's all about this new woman who's trying to figure out her way in life. And I love an extended metaphor in a book. I'm really like a sucker for that. And especially if it's an extended metaphor that I can like get down with. And this one does that. So it's basically a big extended metaphor about disordered eating and the ways that disordered eating can be passed down through generations, particularly through like female generations. Also happens in men as well, but like disproportionately happening in women, and the ways that her mother has kind of given her this inherited trauma, in a sense, about their identity and about, you know, their body and what they consume. So I really appreciated it. I thought that it did a good job in that sense, and the metaphor like tracked the whole way through. So yeah, overall, I very much enjoyed this book. I do think like if you're reading this book, you need to read it till the end, because the end there's like some payoff that happens that kind of full circles the entire book. So read this until the end if you're enjoying it. Like it makes a lot more sense when you get to the end. So loved this one. And then the next book that I read is also 5 stars. It's the only one I don't have a physical copy of here, so I'll put one up on the screen, but also 5 stars. Maybe my favorite book. Like it's so close between these two. And this one also has like a big extended metaphor throughout, and that is Our Wives Under the Sea. And this is by, who is this by? This is by Julia Armfield, and this has also been all over, and this was one of my most anticipated releases for 2022, and I've been wanting to read it since last year. It's also a 5-star prediction for me this year, and it was indeed 5 stars. So this book follows 2 women, can't remember their names now, and one of them, they're married. One of them has a job in which she goes on like deep sea dives, like deep sea missions. And she goes on one that was originally supposed to be like a few weeks, and then she ends up being down there for 6 months. So clearly something has gone wrong. And when she comes back, she has changed in some way. She is not the same woman that left. The bulk of this story follows them at home after she has come back, and both of the women are struggling. And like, really, this is the story of an unhappy marriage. That's simplification. Really, this is a story of a marriage in transition and how they're going to navigate that. And I love stories about marriage, particularly if it's a story about marriage that is changing in some way. And that could be like whether they're struggling, whether they're pivoting, like whatever it might be. I just adore stories about the intricacies of marriage. I'm very intrigued by it. And this really is that, like, that's all this is. And I've seen so many reviews of this book where I'm like, what book did you read? That is not what I got out of it at all. And I think when a book has that, it is a sign of a really brilliant book, or at least it can be. And I think that this book does that. So for me, this book is all about a marriage in transition. And you get flashbacks from the kind of like scientist point of view as she's in the submarine. And so you're slowly like unfolding what went on there. My one critique with this book is I think there are too many flashbacks in which there's not enough progression in the flashback. So there's like 5, and I think there could have been 3 total, and it would have kind of condensed it a little bit more nicely. But that's a small gripe. So for me, this really tackles like a theme and has an extended metaphor of like, what do you do in a marriage or a long-term relationship when you change, which is something that happens in every relationship. And what happens when the change is big? How do you decide whether or not this relationship is still good for both of you and healthy for both of you when someone really does change drastically? And what happens if that change happens all at one time? So it's kind of urgent instead of gradually over time, which is what happens with most people. And for me, this does a great job of exploring like when you experience a traumatic event and that event changes you, alters you, and there's no going back to the person that you were before. How do you decide if then some of the relationships in your life make sense now that you are a different person or a different version of yourself? And I loved that about this book. I mean, it was just like chef's kiss, so good. I could read stories like this all day. The writing is also phenomenal. So if any of that intrigues you, highly encourage you to pick it up. I loved it. All right, next book. Let's see on the old laptop what the next book was. Oh, okay, yes. So the next book that I read was Through the Woods. And this is a graphic short story collection, and this is by Emily Carroll. And I'll give you a little taste of what the art looks like. So that is the art. I really love the color scheme. It's all like black, red, and blue. And this, I think, would actually be weirdly a good comp title if you enjoyed Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, translated by Anton Herb. If you loved that, I think that this could actually work for you. This is YA, so know that going in. I don't normally read a lot of YA, but this worked for me. I think like YA horror can sometimes work for me. I also think the graphic format helped. So there are 6 stories, I think, in this, and the last one is definitely the best. So, I mean, it's very quick to read, so definitely get to the last one if you're checking this out. But yeah, it just follows kind of fairy tale-like stories, like gothic stories, that have like a horror-ish element. And I really appreciated that. The art style is beautiful. The stories are intriguing. The last one, like I said, is definitely my favorite, and I think the creepiest. It's also the longest, I think, as well. And all of them have like a little twinge at the end. It's almost like M. Night Shyamalan style, where like there's something at the end that just like flips and makes it even creepier than it was before, and I really enjoyed that as well. So that was Through the Woods. Next book up, I read or am reading for my Catapult Books video, and that is Portrait of an Unknown Lady, and this is by Maria Gainza, and this is translated from the Spanish by Thomas Bunstead. And oh, I'm realizing that I didn't say where all these books were published by. Really quick, this is published by Harper Via. Our Wives Under the Sea is published by Picador, and this is published by Simon & Schuster. So this, Catapult Books, so this one follows a woman. I read these so long ago, I'm not gonna remember the names. What is her name? I don't remember her name. Maybe she's unnamed, who knows? So this follows a woman who becomes an assistant to an art curator, and she becomes enamored with this art curator. And earlier on in the book, that's not a spoiler, she dies, the art curator. And so this assistant kind of falls into a plagiarism scandal that has been going on in the art world that the curator was involved with, and she knew this, so that also, like, she's aware, and she kind of falls into this. But what this book is really exploring is like, what is authenticity in art? So why isn't a forgery, if it's done really well and is like a quality piece of art, why isn't that also considered art? Or like, is that considered art? And should we appreciate the art just based on the quality alone and the merit of the art, even if it is a forgery? So the way that she explores that is really interesting in the form of this novel, because this novel is full of, you know, quotes, interviews, kind of like retellings, or like there's kind of descriptions of art in here that are very much like based off of what a description would be in real life. So all of that is going on in here to play with this idea of like, here I am quoting other people and inserting things that exist in real life. And what does that mean about this novel? If I'm inserting quote unquote other people's words, other people's images, all those types of things, does that make this not an original work of fiction? So I thought that kind of parallel was very interesting. Overall, I do think this novel lacked some engagement from the reader, so I just didn't feel fully engaged the whole time. I think it made us stick in that idea of like, I'm playing with like plagiarism in here. It made us stick in that a little bit too long, and I felt bogged down in it. But I like a story that has kind of a through line throughout and is really trying to comment on a social issue of our time. So I appreciated that about this. So that is Portrait of an Unknown Lady. The next one is An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed, and this is by Helene Torsten, and this is translated by Marlaine Delargy, and this is translated from the Swedish. And this is the second short story collection that this author has done that is like meant to go together. So the first one is An Elderly Lady Is Up to No Good. I don't know if there are going to be more, but I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the first one as well, and I do think it would be beneficial to read the first one before you got here. You don't have to, but it will give you a little bit of context for the first story in here, and this is like 7 stories or something like that. Well, it's short stories, and then the last one is really like a novella. So this follows Maud, who is an 80-something-year-old woman with killer tendencies. And she lives in her very nice apartment that she has inherited and is rent controlled, and she just wants some peace and quiet in her apartment, and anyone that gets in her way needs to go, you know what I mean? So she, again in classic Maud style, the first 5 or whatever stories it is take place in her past, and each one contains a murder just like the first one, and you follow Maud as she tries to convince you that these people deserve to be murdered. It's very like do, like it's kind of cozy. So I appreciate that about it. And then the novella at the end takes place in the current timeline, in which she's on this like lavish vacation in South Africa. She's going on safari, and there are crimes that are being committed at the stops of her travel group. And so something is going on and we are trying to figure out what is happening. So really enjoyed this. If you like murder mysteries, I think you will really enjoy this series. And I like that it's like a interconnected short story series. I really enjoy that. So definitely pick this up if you're interested in that. And this one is done by Soho Press. Next one, and I will say this one and the next one and another one I was talking about will all be in a vlog that I can link down below, and it's my Women in Translation reading vlog. So this one is another Women in Translation book, and that is Blood Feast. And this is the complete short story collection of Malika Moustadraf. And this is the first time all of her short stories have been collected and translated into English in like one solid collection. And this is translated from the Arabic by Alice Guthrie. This I overall enjoyed as well. This follows a lot of themes about like the gendered body and gender in Morocco. So this is a Moroccan author. The stories take place in Morocco. And yeah, the like gender differences that people experience in Morocco. It follows a wide cast of characters. So not just like women and men, but there's also like a story about an intersex and or trans person. It's not explicitly stated in the story. But yeah, so it follows a wide range of identities, and I really appreciated that about it, and really explores gender politics in Morocco during the 90s mostly. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely pick it up. I did enjoy the stories and the writing was good. I just ultimately don't think this is going to stay with me for very long. But other than that, still enjoyed it and would recommend. And this one is done by Feminist Press. I'm gonna keep forgetting to say the publisher. Okay, so next one I read was Say Nothing, and this is a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland, and this is by Rodden Keefe. This was really popular when it came out a number of years ago. Rodden Keefe just wrote Empire of Pain, I think last year, and that one's also been really popular, and I'm interested in it as well. This one I read with my husband. Every year we read a book together and have like a mini book club, but he only reads nonfiction. So, you know, I'm down for nonfiction, but like, man, you're missing out, honey. So we read this one this year, and this is a little bit of a chunkster, so it was like no easy feat. I do think that this story was really interesting. I get why it was so hyped when it first came out. So this follows kind of two things. So the first thing is it's following a true crime story about a woman who was disappeared, basically, and she was a mother of like 10 or something like that, and that story bookends this story. So it's the beginning, the end, and then interspersed throughout the middle is the story of this mother and her family and all the children she left behind. Throughout that, it's about the Troubles. So and the true crime story really does frame that well, because like it matches the timeline well of what's going on in the Troubles, and the conflict in Ireland. So I did overall enjoy this. This has pictures throughout it, so I do recommend like having a physical edition of this if you're going to read it. I think it does add to the story a bit. It also has a very extensive note section in the back. Like it's like over 50 pages, the note section. So there's lots more to dive into if you have the physical book. With this, I think it was informative. I think it was a good job of narrative nonfiction, which I enjoy in nonfiction. The one issue I had with it, but it was kind of a larger issue, is sometimes this got too bogged down in the research, and it was so historically heavy with things that I didn't feel we needed for the overall narrative to happen. and kind of lost my interest at several points along the way. So I give this 3 stars. I still enjoyed it. I would still recommend it if you're curious about learning it all about this, and it was very informative. So like if that's the main goal, it did its job. And this one is published by Anchor Books. Next one is the last one for that Women in Translation reading blog, and that is Boulder, and this is by Eva Baltasar, translated from the Spanish by Julia Sanches. And Eva Baltasar is a Mexican author, and she wrote Permafrost, which I'm highly interested in picking up after I read this because I loved this book. The writing in here is stunning. I said that in the blog, still stands. The writing is stunning. I absolutely adored it, and also props to the translator for that. This is a very slight novel, as you can see, and this novel follows 2 women, one named Boulder and one named Samsa, and they meet as Boulder is working on like the crew of a ship as a cook, and she really enjoys that life. She enjoys the like exhaustion of her days, and then she meets Samsa and they end up falling in love, and Samsa just gets this really great job opportunity in Reykjavik and says that she's moving, and Boulder decides to go with her. When they get there, the story takes a shift in that Samsa very much wants to have kids and Boulder sort of doesn't. And it's kind of the mulling over of that decision for Boulder, and also then the consequences of her making the decision that she makes and how that plays out. I really loved the juxtaposition of the 2 narratives. So it's all from Boulder's perspective, but Samsa has more say in their lives and like in her narrative, maybe than even herself. So I appreciated it like forcing Boulder's narrative out when Samsa really is the more assertive character. So I loved that aspect of it. I loved the writing. Again, love the concept of like exploring a relationship and the transitions in a relationship. I had a ton of like sapphic reading this month as well, so that was great. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I would highly recommend anyone picking this up if it seems interesting to them, and I will look at Permafrost by this author as well. And this one is published by And Other Stories. Next one is Mrs. March, and this is by Virginia Feito, or maybe it's Feito. I could be wrong on that. Maybe it's Feito. And this one is published, oh my gosh, with the library editions, I can never freaking tell who the publisher is. Okay, this is Liverlight Publishing. And this, like, Mrs. March is unwell, y'all. That is what I'm taking away from this story. From the get-go, I was like, Mrs. March is clearly not in her right mind. And I don't think that's a spoiler for the book. I think that's very obvious from the beginning. So this follows a woman, Mrs. March, whose husband is a very successful author and has just come out with his latest book. And she is at the bakery like she does every day and getting her bread and such things. And the woman at the register basically says like, oh, have you read your husband's new book? And she's like, oh, like, no, like, not really. And she's like, oh, what do you think about the main character being based on you? And while Mrs. March hasn't read the book, she does know that the main character is like not a likable character, like pretty hated by everyone that reads the book. And so Mrs. March then starts becoming increasingly unsettled and obsessed about figuring out if the main character was based on her, and if it is, what does that mean about her husband? And she really just like spirals, and it goes on to wild places. I would classify this as psychological horror, like 100%. That's what I would classify this as. And I am in my psychological horror bag right now, so I really enjoyed this. I do think that it wasn't a perfect novel. I think that for me, Mrs. March was a little bit 2D of a character. I would have liked some more depth on her. I'm sure that it was intentional the way that this character was being written, but just personal preference, I thought like I wanted a little more depth to the character. But that is Mrs. March. All right, second to last, penultimate book is Celestial Bodies, and this is by Alharthi, and this is translated from the Arabic by Marilyn Booth, and this is again by Catapult, so this will be in that Catapult video. So this one is, this is hard to talk about. So the blurb says that it's about 3 sisters in Oman. Each of them are dealing with kind of romantic relationships in a different way. And then also like backdrop into the changing history and like politics of Oman, particularly around slaves. So like it follows the transitionary period of when slaves are no longer legal to have. And that's the blurb. And that is in the book. But I would say like this story for me is in no way just about the 3 sisters. This story follows so many people, like so many people. There is a character map in the front of the book, and if you're going to read this book, you need to have the physical copy and you need to have the character map in front of you. I started this book as an audiobook and it was a mistake. I started listening to it on a flight and didn't have my physical copy with me. That was a mistake. You very much need this character map. I mean, like, look how many characters are on here, and like it, even with this, I was somewhat confused. And I don't know if that's because I started as an audiobook, so that might be on me. But I was still somewhat confused. For me, this story is really more about Maya and Abdullah, who are a married couple, and their children, and then like kind of as their family expands from there. But for me, they are the 2 main characters, and Maya is one of the sisters. So this book, I do think, does a great job of exploring like the changes that happen throughout the generations and the disappointments and shame that, you know, each generation can put on one another, and how that impacts our lives, and maybe even how that impacts progress and happiness and all those types of things. That I really loved about this story, and think it did such a good job of. The stuff about it, like slaves and slavery, might have gone over my head a little bit. Like, I know that there was some stuff talking about that, but like I couldn't track that narrative as well in my mind. Again, that could totally be on me. And there were like POVs that I was just like straight up confused on how they like fit into the overall narrative. But still worth the read. The writing is spectacular, and like if you have this character map in front of you and you like put the time and effort into it, I like have no doubt that it will be a big payoff. So that is Celestial Bodies. Lastly, I read this short, slight little book, and it's nonfiction, and it's a quick and easy guide to sex and disability. And this is by A. Andrews, and this is published by Limerence, I believe. Am I making that up? Yeah. And this is just exactly what it says, a quick and easy guide on sex and disability. So it really talks about like how should we be talking about, and like kind of saying that we should be talking about sex and sexuality in all bodies, right? And making ourselves aware of what that means for all bodies. And disability can mean like so many things, right? Like there's actual like physical disabilities that might impinge on mobility. There's some like mental disabilities that might impinge on other things. Like there's so many things happening here that everyone should sort of be talking about, because so many people are impacted by this. Like the disabled population is like 33% of the population in the US, I think. So this I think is really important. It's very accessible. Like this is like, if you were like, it's my first thing I'm gonna read about this topic, this is a great first thing to read. Here's like a little bit of the comic style and what it looks like. I think it's great. Nice to be able to look at the pictures and see like all different types of bodies represented. So I really appreciated that and would highly recommend. I also gave this 5 stars. This was the last 5-star read for me for this month. So that is the wrap up, my friends. This is going to be long. I'm so sorry. If anybody has made it to the end, here's what I want to know. One, I would like to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them, or if you're interested in any of them. I would like to know the best book that you read in August. Very interested to know that. And then thirdly, because you stuck around so long, as I've mentioned, I'm going to be doing a video on Catapult books. That's going to be coming out soon. And then I'm going to move on to my next indie publisher that I want to review. And if you have an indie publisher that you're like, Elise, I want to see you review books by this publisher, let me know down below. I'm very intrigued. I'm open to whatever, and because only like 10 people watch my videos, like, you have so much say. If one person commented, like, basically that's the video I'm gonna do. So there you have it. Pick which indie publisher you'd like me to review and I will be there. So with that, that's the end of the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.